prospective parliamentary candidate for the City of Chester standing for the Liberal Democrats. I am an existing borough councillor on Cheshire West and Chester Council. Have been since its inception in 2008. Prior to that I was a councillor on the old City Council, have been since 2002. Prior to that I've served communities in Upton as well as Newton and Poole, which is the ward that I represent. So I've been involved in politics in Chester for over 20 years. Prior to that I was born within the city walls. I'm a true Cestrian. I was born in Stanley Place. My mother, I understand, nearly dropped me on the doorstep of the nursing home in Stanley Place way back in 1956. And I worked for that once great chemical company, ICI, sadly no longer with us. And I moved to Ineos Claw at Runcorn. So I've worked in the chemical industry. I worked in the chemical industry for 30 years. I retired from that as the HR director of Ineos Claw Vinyls. So I have vast experience of private industry. I have experience of blue chip companies. I have experience in the public sector. In addition to that, I've worked for charities in Chester and indeed still do. So I think I know how to connect people and business. I think I know how to influence and who to influence. And I think that I can make a real difference to the City of Chester. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Fourthly, representing the Labour Party, Chris Matheson.
Thank you, Father. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Christian Matheson and I'm the Labour Party candidate for the City of Chester. I grew up in a small village in rural Cheshire, just the other side of Frodsham, and I now live in Hull with my wife and my 2 children. In a varied career, I've lived and worked abroad in a foreign country. I've worked sweeping up floors in a chemicals factory, so not quite as senior as Bob. I've worked for the last few years as an HR manager for a trade union, and in another role within that trade union, I've worked with some of the biggest employers in the Chester area, particularly Airbus and Vauxhall, to secure investment and jobs in the area. And I'm hoping this evening to try and convey to you my belief and my view that the country isn't working well at the moment for ordinary people, and that we can do much better in Chester and throughout the United Kingdom to make it a stronger and fairer place to live. Thank you.
Thank you.
I suggest that the candidates stand to speak and have a microphone somewhere near you.
Right.
Microphone.
Thank you, Brian. Were they audible, those candidates at the back of the hall, yes or no? Will you say if they're not, please? Because obviously, thanks, Brian, that's going to be pretty critical. Thank you. Right, we're going to move straight on into our first question. We've got a massive questions. I've got some other pointed questions here, and I'm going to start, not surprisingly, with the National Health Service. Every party wants to throw more money at the National Health Service, but how are they going to control costs? Let's start with APC. Would you like to take that one first? How are you going to control costs in the National Health Service?
Well, to take the first part of your question, we do need to spend more money on our National Health Service. We've got a population which is getting older. The demands on the health service are increasing. The cost of treatment is increasing. The cost of medicines is increasing. We do need to spend more money on the National Health Service. But as a Conservative Party can show, we've got a record over the past 5 years of actually reducing costs in the National Health Service, whilst at the same time putting more money into frontline doctors and nurses and medical staff across the country. We've seen that across the country, but we've seen that in Chester too. We've got a record number of doctors and nurses in the Countess of Chester Hospital, and we've done that by making sure that we spend the money wisely, cut down on bureaucracy, get rid of many, many thousands of administrators, and make sure that the NHS works at the behest of people's GPs and doctors rather than the behest of bureaucrats, whether they're based in regional health authorities or whether they're based down in Westminster.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Bob, we're all promising to spend more money. How are you going to control the costs?
I think we need to have a debate in the country about the future of the National Health Service. My party is promising 8 billion over the course of the next Parliament, because that's what the National Health Service asked for, and we have found the money in order to deliver that. But for me, that's a fix for the next 5 years. What we actually need to do is we need to take a strategic view. If we are to have a sustainable National Health Service into the future, I'll pause a moment.
Why don't you get your hand held?
Now, can everybody hear me now?
One, two. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. Right. The point I was making is that my party is promising 8 billion. We found the money, but that is accounted for according to government financing rules, so that's legit. But in my view, personal view, then that is only a fix for the next 5 years. What we have to have is a conversation with our nation, really, to say, where is the National Health Service going to be, not in 5 years' time, but in 10 years' time, and in 20 years' time and beyond. As Stephen rightly says, the population is increasing, the population is growing older, and sadly, illnesses such as dementia and Alzheimer's are beginning to come to the fore as our population grows older. And therefore, we need to have a different approach to the National Health Service. We need to take a strategic view. We need to look very carefully at how to prevent people going into the medical sector from the beginning. I'm very proud that my party is investing a lot of money in mental health, 500 million a year for the course of the next Parliament. That will begin to address problems for young people with drug abuse, with drink abuse, with depression. That will begin to address those problems at an early age and prevent people from having to get access to very expensive medical services in the future. We have to take a strategic view. We have to, as a nation, we have to have a healthier lifestyle than we do at the present time, and we need to embrace the education system in that. We need to educate our young people. We need to make sure that people have the best start in life. I'm delighted that my party is giving the children of our country the best start in life, because we're starting early with preschool education, and we're seeing those children through from 2 to 19 in a sustainable way. So I think we have to take a strategic view. We need to have a further conversation about it, because the National Health Service cannot be maintained at its present level unless there are changes.
Thanks, Bob, very much indeed. Now, National Health Service we're concentrating on. Everybody wants to throw more money at it. How are you going to control costs? Chris?
Well, first of all, Labour's pledges on providing more money are fully costed, and we've actually identified where we're going to get the extra money from, and that will be on a mansion tax on properties of £2 million or more, and a levy for the tobacco companies. So with Labour, you know exactly where the money is going to come from. The question was about how we're going to control costs. So there are various different ways that we'll do this. First of all, one of the problems that we're facing hospitals at the moment is the crisis in GP services, because around 600 GP surgeries and practices in the UK have closed. People can't get an appointment at their GP surgery. It's all 8 o'clock in the morning, engage, press redial, engage, press redial. Half an hour later, they're still pressing redial. So we've said that with some of the money that we're going to raise from that mansion tax and that tax on the levies, we will recruit 5,000 more doctors. Many of them will be GPs, and we will guarantee a GP appointment within 48 hours. That means that people will go to their GPs rather than turning up at the next best alternative, which is A&E, which is why A&E services are being clogged up. Another way that we'll manage costs is with our proposal to merge long-term social care with the NHS. At the moment in the Countess, we know that there are around about 80 long-term patients who are elderly who shouldn't be there and should be released into social care, but there is no social care facilities available for them. By merging health and social care into one unified service that provides the care and the care right the way through, we will maintain a seamless service that will cut out a lot of management and bureaucratic costs, but will focus a lot of as many of the resources as possible at the sharp end where it's needed. And that will stop the drain on hospitals such as the counties have seen, looking after patients who quite frankly don't need to be there.
Thanks very much. Now, Steve, what would you give answer be to the question of how do we control costs in the NHS?
Good evening. First thing of all, what you're going to have to face up to in this country is a reality check that the other people here representing these parties will not address. First of all, what's already been done to the NHS through policy making through these other parties. We need to allow the NHS to buy out of the private finance initiatives which have been saddled right across this country. Saddling the NHS with massive amounts of debt by financing it through private equity firms. We need to reduce the incredible amount of non-clinically trained staff within the NHS, which I think is running about 46%. A huge amount of the bill for the NHS is for the highly paid managers within the NHS. And here is one of the conversation points we all know that has to be spoken about, which makes everybody feel uncomfortable. Last year, the population, the net figure of immigration into this country was 298,000 people. Net figure. We have to realise that whether it's the NHS, schools or any other public service, it will place a strain on those services. Everybody here tonight is talking about a national health service. Do you want it to be used as an international health service? Can it sustain it? That's the reality. Can it sustain it? And the reality is, it can't. Because whilst we're funding not only the European Union with excessive costs, membership costs, approaching £400 million a week, and our foreign aid commitments in excess of £200 million a week, we're cutting public services, including the NHS, in this country. Services that we all depend on and rely on. And we have to face up to some very harsh realities in this country about where our priorities lie and where our responsibilities lie to our people as a nation. And we have to take these decisions because there is now no longer any choice. That's where we're at. That's the reality. And what we have to do is unshackle the debt that's been saddled on the NHS, reduce the managers and control the costs, and look at the money that we're paying for drugs and other services in the NHS. But there's something missing from the debate here at the moment on the NHS, and that's the TTIP agreement, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership through the European Union, which will allow American companies to come into our country and take advantage of profiteering of the NHS. But these people, some of these parties here tonight won't even allow a referendum on European Union membership. Your NHS is going to be wide open to further profiteering by American companies. So that's another reality that we need to take into account. And the United Kingdom Independence Party wants this country to have a referendum on Europe to be able to govern our country independently and take control of every aspect of our country, including control of our NHS. Thank you.
We'll have our first supplementary through the floor. Can I ask you please to stand, give me your name and then your brief question. Who would like to go first? Nobody? No? Yes, lady in the back row, please. Name?
Hi, Claire.
Claire. Thank you, Claire.
I wanted to know
first question is, what impact will the investment that the parties want to bring into the NHS have on social and community care? Gentlemen, who'd like to go first on that one? Anybody? All right, Bob, we're going to start us off on that one, are you? On the investment in social and community care. You mentioned something about the Liberal Democrats' policy on mental health issues, for example.
Yes, I think it's very important because we need to start at the youngest age. And with my party, probably some in this room, maybe many in this room, will have been touched by family members or distant family members, perhaps, or friends who had serious mental health issues. And we know that from research that the cost of that, if it goes untreated, leads to considerable costs in the National Health Service at later ages. So what my party is quite rightly has identified, and is quite rightly targeting, is start early, provide the right counselling, provide the right treatment, provide the right mentoring, so that those who suffer from those desperate conditions in early age are enabled to, with confidence, face their future, so that they no longer pose a potential risk of having further, more serious mental illness at a later age, which can and does at the present time lead to costs to our prison service, leads to costs to our police service, and leads to costs to the NHS service. So take a strategic view, invest in our young, and we will manage the costs into the future.
Thanks, Bob. Would you like anybody else like to? Chris, you want to give on that, please do, on the investment in social and community care.
The money that I talked about that we have identified and had fully costed will include 3,000 new care staff. And I've also mentioned about the way that we will integrate health and social care into the NHS to make a seamless service. Another thing we'll do is we will end the privatisation of the NHS. And that's important because a lot of the NHS-based social care at the moment is provided by private care companies like Care UK, that operate on 15-minute time slots, that pay the minimum wage, but don't pay the minimum wage for travelling time or downtime, so that the care staff that are providing the care are rushing to complete their work within 15 minutes. They can't help their patients, their clients, call it what you will, with a complete service. They have to choose whether to make a cup of tea, help with personal hygiene, clean the house, or have a chat and just have a discussion. So by having the short time slots based on the most minimum of service, so the companies like Care UK can make huge amounts of profit at the public expense, some of which I should add the chairman of Care UK gives to the Conservative Party, but that's a different story. The level of care is simply not being given. So we will integrate social care, adult social care into the NHS, and we will end the privatisation of that social care so that we have proper patient-focused, not profit-focused care of people who need it.
One of the biggest issues that we faced at the last general election was the cost of social care. People, in many cases, faced many, many years receiving care. And whilst they were receiving that care, they gradually saw their savings and the money that they'd worked their entire working lives for dwindling away and disappearing in social care costs. So during the course of this Parliament, we introduced a social care bill which caps the amount of money that people need to spend on social care. Now the cap is set to about £70,000, but it means that people with a house can have the certainty that they can pass something on to their children, on to the next generation. Previously, older people were feared that all of their assets, the money that they'd worked for, everything that they'd saved for their children might disappear. By introducing the social care bill, we've made sure that people have got the certainty of a maximum of the amount that can be spent on social care, and they've got the certainty of being able to leave something that they've worked hard for to the next generation.
Thanks very much, thank you, Stephen. Steve, do you want to say anything on the subject of social and community care?
I think, to be quite honest with you, at the moment, we're realising as a nation we've not only got an ageing population but a growing population. We have to realise that we've got to access the money from where it's credible to take the money. We cannot have a party, i.e. the Labour Party.
The microphone.
Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Hold it. Take it off.
We cannot have a situation where we are accessing money by way of creating new taxation via the Labour Party. We cannot have a party elected which is simply going to dream up new taxes as a way of funding public services which are under massive strain. We cannot do it. It's as simple as that. You will see money exiting Britain, businesses exiting Britain, and wealth creators exiting Britain like there is no tomorrow. What we have to do is fund these emergency services, the health service and the social care by utilising the money on exit of the European Union to fund our own nation and our own services. And that's where we've got to be doing. Yes. It's as simple as that. We can face up to reality. I'll tell you now, you will see massive exodus of money from Britain on Labour government being elected in this country. No doubt about it. And if anybody's in doubt, I'll give you one small example. I have a friend who's got a business in Chester. Who will lose their jobs, who will close his business on election of a Labour government. And it's all part of the issue because you need to create wealth in this country to be able to fund public services. Thank you.
All right, Steve, thank you very much indeed. Very briefly, if you would, because we've got massive questions. Yes, please, Chris, come back.
So, Newcombe Stephen said he's got a mate who will leave Chester and leave the UK if the Labour government's elected. And my simple advice to him is, in that case, let him go. Everybody can begin to be born British. Think of our history, think of our culture, think of our language, think of the prosperity that we have that many countries don't enjoy. Think of the decency that most people have in this country. Think of the democracy that we've given to the world. I'm proud to be British. Stephen, if your mate doesn't want to be here,
National Health Service. Can we stick on National Health Service for the moment? Anybody else want to come back on National Health Service? If not, I'm going to move on. Yes. I have another question. I'm going to move on because we've got a mass to get to. Could I have your name, please? John, and your question on National Health Service, please.
Just one that I wrote down but hasn't been asked.
Right, go on, please.
It's basically, I think it's picking up what I see as every party competing with each other to throw more money at it.
Right.
And the history of my lifetime has always been continual crises in the NHS. So I was glad to hear Mr. Thompson say that we need to take a more strategic view of where we're going with health services. What I'm interested in is a way of controlling demand for health services, which I think the lady touched on with care in the community and for mental health, so that people don't.
Okay, question, John, please, question.
Right. What are the parties doing? For example.
Question now, not a question.
Right. What are they doing to prevent growth in demand? For example, reducing diseases caused by.
All right, I think you've got the question there, thank you. Preventative medicine. What are they doing to promote preventative medicine? Stephen, would you like to say anything about that in terms of the Conservative Party policy on preventing people getting in the first place?
In terms of preventing people from being we've been talking about the National Health Service, but for me, the most important thing about the National Health Service, the only way we can fund the National Health Service is actually if we're raising the money as a country in order to fund the National Health Service. Now, I do want to come back on what was previously said. Because if we do not have an economy that generates wealth, if we do not have an economy that generates jobs, if we do not have an economy that generates prosperity, we are never going to have any money to put into the National Health Service. So for me, the key priority is actually getting the economy right and making sure that we can afford to make the promises that we are all making. In terms of preventative medicine, we all need to make sure that we lead as healthy a life as possible. A lot of that is making sure, and I know we were discussing this in the room earlier, we were talking about our own lifestyle choices. As a generation, we do smoke less than the previous generation. We are seeing rates of alcohol abuse declining from previous generation. We put a huge amount of money into making sure that drug abuse is tackled at the source and that people get the care that they need to get off drugs rather than actually continuing to use them and continuing to be a drain on the National Health Service. And we're seeing a huge amount of effort putting into making sure that we encourage healthier living at an earlier stage. I know myself in Parliament, I've been a member of the All-Party Parliament on school food, and one of the key issues that we're trying to tackle is to encourage children at a very early age to have a healthier eating style to make sure that we don't have the problems with things like obesity, which puts a massive strain on the National Health Service at a later stage.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you. Now, did I Steve or want to come back on this one on the right? Bob, if you'd like to, on the issue of preventative medicine, stopping people getting ill in the first place.
Okay, I wrote to people that talk about mental health and how important that is that we get in early with our young people. I think also there are things that we need to address as a society. Supermarket prices for alcohol are clearly an abuse in their own right, and that must be addressed. We must have a unit price for alcohol in this country because it is too easily accessible by our young, and that is not a healthy issue for the future. It's not a question, I always find it very fascinating when we talk about the national health. It isn't just about the National Health Service, it's about a society. And what we have to do, we can't look at it in compartments. What we have to do is we have to look at it across the piece. And that means that we've got to work in education from the earliest age, through education, as our young people come through, and out of education, into the tertiary education sector, and into employment, to make people think about their lifestyles, make people think about their health and well-being. And we need to have this as part of the national curriculum, and we need to make sure that at every opportunity we take the opportunity to guide, to mentor, and to support, not to tell, to support people through their lives so that they live healthy lifestyles in the future, so that actually they will have less time to spend in the National Health Service.
Thanks, Bob, very much. Sorry?
It's been suggested to me that the reason we're getting interference is that all three microphones are on at the same time. If you could speak in your microphone and then switch it off, then it would probably be better.
Oh, I was right. Thank you, Brian. Okay, Chris?
Right. One of the points I was going to make, forgive me, is that I think it's very important that we learn from the best of the rest. In cancer care, for instance, in this country, we're pretty good, but actually we're not the best. There are other countries who have a much better record than we do in terms of the treatment of different types of cancer. Now, we have to be a more sharing and learning society than we are at the present time. We have to learn from the best of the rest and apply the best of the learning in this country.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, we'll ask Chris or Steve like to come in on this one, Chris. Then we'll move on to another topic. We've got so many Chris.
I think that Conservative Stephen and Bob have made some useful points there actually, and I won't always disagree. I think some of the long-term vision has been very helpful there. I do want to make one point, which is perhaps, if you want to just say it's a bit more contentious, but poverty and inequality breed ill health. And when we have in West Western Chester we have about 5,000 families and individuals accessing the food bank. With the greatest of respect to the food bank and the wonderful work they do, it's probably not the best quality food. It means that children are going to school perhaps not properly fed. It means that children's education is being affected. And if we want to improve health, we have to be looking at areas other than health, including housing and education. We know there is a housing crisis at the moment, so we'll be counting people who are across the borough, across the constituency, who are either very expensively housed, or who are badly housed, or incorrectly housed. That will provide additional pressures on the families, which will affect stress and strains within the family relationships, and will affect mental health. I've visited Richmond Court, the homeless hospital, and I was told there that one of the biggest causes of homelessness is the lack of availability of one-bedroom properties for single men and women. And of course, homelessness leads to other abuses such as an increased dependence on alcohol, more likely to come into contact with drug abuse and drug abuse problems. So we should be looking at health in the way that Bob and Conservative Stephen have referred to, but there has to be a broader answer as well that reduces inequality and starts to improve the factors that have an impact on your health right across the piece.
Steve was saying on the subject of preventative measures, stopping people getting in the first place.
What I'd like to see is an opportunity for young people in this country to be able to access not only work, but housing, have opportunities, facilities, open spaces. When I was a kid, I grew up in Blacon. I've lived there since I was 1 year old in 1965. We had plenty of open spaces. We never went without. And to be quite honest with you, at the moment, we're now seeing a generation come out of the education system, quite often poorly educated. 30-year-old guy in Blacon, learning to read and write, in the hope of getting a job. On the outskirts of Chester, there are many employers, factory-based employers, some of them, who are now basically having high levels of foreign nationals working in those factories. Young people in this country cannot access work. What you're seeing is a generation who cannot afford to live, who cannot get into employment, access housing. You're seeing mental health issues go through the roof amongst young people, and effectively, as a nation, we now have an entire nation of all ages who, quite frankly, in this country, are struggling. Never mind eating healthy, eating at all. Keep the homes, being able to eat. Never in my lifetime, at 51 years old, would I have thought we'd have nearly a million. Not anymore. So we have to invest our own money into this country. And we undertake a responsibility and a duty to our future generations and to our elderly in this country to meet a commitment to our own people. Or do we continue to borrow money on the open markets, add it to the national debt collectively, but these three parties have ran up to about £1.5 trillion, and then give that £600 million a week to the European Union and other countries we foreign aid? Or do we rebuild this country to make it a healthy, wealthy nation?
Thank you. No problem. Come back for one sentence if you could on something that Chris said. Make one sentence, Bob. I'm going to move on to my next topic, which actually is food banks.
Oh, is it?
Keep your power dry in that case, because my next question
The point I was going to make about food banks is that for those who use food banks, then it's a humiliation. It's not a cry for help, it's a desperate state. And for many who use the food banks, and there has been an increase in those who are using it, but in many cases it is entirely avoidable, because what's actually happened is there has been a change in the benefits paid by state to citizens, and there has been a delay in payment of benefits to residents. And if you find yourself short, and in some cases the delay in payment has been going up to 11 or 14 weeks, then that puts enormous strain on the family budget. And it's entirely avoidable. It's a good example where states should be helping residents who perhaps have tripped in their path of life. And it's a good example where states should be helping people to get up, dust themselves off and make their way forward again. The state has to get its act together to make sure that residents get what they need when they need it.
Well, thank you all. Now, if we're not careful with the two Ronnies, will we get the answer before we get the question? The question is, food banks have become a feature of our society in recent years. How do we stop them becoming a permanent feature? Chris?
I thought that was a really good point you just made, Bob, and congratulate you on it. I still struggle to comprehend the fact that Chester, which for me was always a rich county town, in the 21st century has a food bank, or two food banks, and that in Cheshire, West and Chester, as I said earlier, there will be at least 5,000 families and individuals who rely on them. Figures will tell you that most of the people who rely on, a large proportion, it might be most, are in work and are facing in-work poverty, and that others are in a situation that Bob has so eloquently described, where perhaps they've been sanctioned on their benefits, perhaps often the most spurious of reasons, or perhaps they have been the benefit delays are just too long. The best way I can think of eradicating the need for food banks is to remake the link between a hard day's work and a fair day's pay, and make work pay again. Wages in Chester, on average, have fallen £2,000 since 2010. Many families will have had a much harder fall than that. And people are still working hard. They're still doing a fair day's work, but they are no longer being paid fairly for that. They are being ground down, being asked to work longer and harder for less as wages fall. We're now just about, after 5 years, getting to the point again where wages are rising faster than prices. But until we actually start to put a premium on paying people fairly for the work that they do, and starting to treat people decently and not as almost as indentured servants or slaves for the work they do, by exploiting them, we won't break that link. One of the policies that the Labour Party is introducing will be to increase the minimum wage to £8 an hour, I think by 2019. We will also introduce a living wage, which is at a higher level than the minimum wage, and we will give tax support to those companies and employers who wish to undertake paying the living wage, and where companies are bidding public contracts, we will be asking them to pay the living wage, so that people who do a decent day's work will be paid fairly for that work, and will no longer have to rely on in-work benefits to the same extent, and certainly don't have to rely on food banks, which, as I say, in the 21st century in Chester is simply unacceptable.
How do we stop food banks being a permanent feature of our society? Stephen? Should we just agree Stephen and Steve? Is that okay? Yes. Stephen.
First of all, I would like to pay tribute to everybody who does work in a food bank, who does give their time, who does give their effort, and who does give food to them. I differ slightly from the responses that have been given, because I do think there is a role for voluntary organisation and volunteers in helping people in our society. I do not believe it should be entirely the role of the state. I believe individuals can play their part as well. And I know over the years I've been involved in delivering food parcels around Chester, and I'm incredibly proud to have done that, and I think it was a very worthwhile thing to do. One of the reasons why we have seen an increase in food banks, there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, actually this government has actually made it easier for organisations to set up food banks, and also easier for people like the Job Centre to signpost people to food banks when they need that support. Under the previous government, they were banned from suggesting people in difficulty should visit a food bank, and they were banned from pointing them in the direction of where that food bank is. I think that would be wrong. If someone's in need, if there's a voluntary organisation that's willing to provide that service, I think the state, through the Job Centre, should actually be willing to say, look, these people here, they can help you. Now, we've talked about sanctions, we've talked about changes to the welfare system. I think what has happened over the past 5 years to the welfare system to help people move out of welfare and into work has what been one of the most beneficial changes this government has made. We've had figures out today showing that there are 2 million more people in work than were in work in 2010. And what we've done is gone to people who were written off under the last government, people who had been on disability benefits for years, for decades, and they were told, here's your money every week, but that's it. There is no hope, there is no opportunity for you. Through things like the work capability assessment, we've talked to people and we found out whether they are capable of working. Because many of these people, sometimes they had conditions which were very, very serious a good many years ago, but actually they haven't recovered from them. Others were facing situations like they had mental health issues which they hadn't recovered from. One of the best moments I've had as a Member of Parliament was meeting someone who had just started work. Now, this individual told me he had been out of work for 10 years. His life consisted of going out once a week to get his benefits and get his food. For 6 days a week, he was at home on his own. It is no wonder he had mental health issues. It is no wonder he is depressed. If I was at home for 6 days a week, I would be depressed and have mental health issues too. But he went for a work capability assessment. He was told, you are physically fit. You are capable of working. You are capable of doing something more with your life. And he was given the help to ensure that happened. It was a long process. It was difficult. It was not easy. Initially, he started off just having to sit in a room with someone and learn how to communicate and talk and socialise with another human being. But after 6 months, he was in a position where he was able to get into work. And I met him, and he said it was the best week of his life. Welfare reform changes lives, and it changes lives for the better. We should be about giving hope and opportunity to people, not just writing them off and allowing them to sit on benefits for the rest of their lives.
Thank you, Stephen. And Steve, what was your view on food banks? How do we stop them being a permanent feature of our society?
What we've got to do is reduce the taxation level and take those on low wages out of the taxation system altogether. And our proposal to adjust the taxation system and take those on £13,000 or less out of the taxation system altogether means it's going to increase the amount of money they have to live on. And that's where we've got to start. There's a twofold problem here. First of all, we're not going to solve this problem overnight in terms of the levels of poverty that have now been reached in this country. So what we've got to do, equally, at local level, is to source out where money is available to meet those temporary problems that we've got. And effectively, within CWAC, Cheshire West and Chester Council, currently, every councillor is allocated a fund of £10,000 a year. And I proposed in the local press around about 18 months ago to reduce these members' budget grants. Each councillor is given these grants to give to local causes, and they're used for all sorts of things. In fact, over a 2-year period, a large amount of money went unused and was rolled over to the following year. So you have a huge amount of money just sloshing around within the council's coffers, going unused, whilst the same council was charging the food bank around £7,000 a year in rent. And we proposed in UKIP and Chester as a temporary problem until the poverty in this country can be fully addressed, that we actually reduce those members' budget grants by about 3/4. And across CWAC we create an emergency poverty fund of around about £500,000 to fund the food banks, support poverty across the region, and actually homeless organisations and charities that can help the people in the locality. So it's a twofold problem. You're not going to solve this overnight, but you can certainly look at how money on a temporary basis over a couple of years would solve the immediate problem. I find it incredible, absolutely incredible, that some councillors within Cheshire West and Chester over the past couple of years have had money sitting available to them, whilst on the streets of Chester people are sleeping homeless and people are using food banks. It's an absolute nonsense. It's a damn disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. Some of these councillors have had money sitting there and being rolled over to the following year, and some of them have used as little as £2,000 and of an available budget of £10,000 when people are going hungry, they're being evicted, and they're sleeping in the rough on the streets. And yet some councillors are happy to use this money. In some cases, I agree with it because it supports local groups. What I don't support is some councillors using some of this money, £3,500 for some Christmas lights in Blakely, and all kinds of other nonsense that gives some councillors a local opportunity to have a photograph in the local press. It doesn't sit well with me when in the same locality people are being thrown out of houses, can't afford to live and sleeping on the streets of Chester.
Okay.
My conscience is clear, but I'll tell you something. There are some councillors within Cheshire West and Chester Council need to look at how they're using the money they have access to.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much indeed. No, you came on the tail end of the last one, Bob, but we'll see how we go. Who would like to come off on the floor? Can I have a name, please?
Yes, my name is Christine Jones.
Christine, thank you, Christine. And your question?
I'm the chair of West Cheshire Food Bank.
Thank you.
So this is about the food bank in this area.
Right.
And over the last 6 months, we've been collecting data which backs up some of what we said as to why people in West Cheshire and this area are using food banks. And we've got that detailed data. And it is about welfare reform and sanctions. They are the two main reasons. But very closely following that is the working poor, people who are working and can't afford. And that is fact that we've been collecting.
Any question, Anne?
My question is, with universal credit, there is a 21-day delay built into that system. I'd like to know from each of the parties, what are you going to do to provide for those people in need in that 21 delay that is built into this new system?
Thank you, Christine. So it's very... Let's just be clear, because I think you all need to be clear about this. The 21 days that Christine refers to are between what and what? Being assessed as entitled to benefit and the first benefit coming through. Yes, there's a built-in 3-week delay between being assessed for benefit and the first benefit coming through. How do the various parties propose to deal with that aspect of welfare? Bob, you have to start with that one.
Thank you for that. I'll just take a issue with the comments made earlier, because certainly my party would... Sorry.
Now,
I'll take one issue that was raised earlier, which my party would certainly never support, and that is we will not support poverty. We will eliminate poverty. And that is what my party will stand for. In terms of the universal credit, it has been a very poorly managed process in its introduction. And let's be quite clear about that. Those who sit down and draw out these procedures and then try and translate them into an IT system, in this particular instance, have made a massive failure, and it has cost many residents in this country their pride. And I find that personally unacceptable. In terms of the 21-day gap that currently exists, and let us be straightforward, in many cases it is a lot longer than that, then clearly that is a failure in the design of the system, and that system needs to be redesigned. There is no reason
why information cannot be turned round within 48 hours. To me, that would be the target. To me, that is deliverable. What it requires is the different agencies to get together and make sure they equally have a common understanding of what the outcome needs to be. We haven't got that at the present time. It's a failure in the design of a system.
Thanks, Bob, very much indeed. Thank you. 21 day in the delay in the universal credit system. Chris? It may be, gentlemen, you'll be making more impact if you don't use the microphone and just speak clearly out. See how it goes.
Let's give that a try and see if
Can you hear me back? Yes, I'm here.
I know several cases in Chester at the moment, one in particular where there's a woman who lives in the Borton area who is profoundly, has been struck down with quite profoundly serious illness, has had to give up work, and she was told to be waiting a minimum of 12 weeks to get support. She has a son who is able to support her, and it's as though we're back to the days of families, of charities, of anything you can find. This isn't my answer, but 21 days, it almost sounds good compared to 12 weeks minimum. One thing I won't do, I wouldn't be encouraging, is sending people to payday loan companies like Wonga.com, and we've seen a huge growth in them recently, and this is the reason why. I actually think that what Bob has said is a good answer. There's absolutely no reason, there is no reason at all why anybody should have to wait 21 days. And that seems to be a deliberate design in the system. I wonder if it's a design in the system to make people think, it's not worth it. I'm going to walk away. I can't wait that long. I'm not going to claim. And all of a sudden you've got one person less claiming, you've got one person less on the statistics, and you've got one fund of money less that you have to pay. It's almost as though that is deliberately designed to discourage and deter people. I don't know if that's the case, I'm just thinking out loud. But there is no reason why that can be the case. I have to tell you, I'm going to answer your question specifically. I don't know the specific answer to that question because it's quite a detailed answer. But I promise you this, I intend to find out and I intend to work to reduce that period because it is not acceptable.
Steve, what would you do about this 21 delay?
That's all good stuff. I think, to be quite honest with you, in a modern Britain, having to wait any period of time when you're in need is unacceptable. I don't know the immediate answer likewise, but to be quite honest with you, at the end of the day, you've got to have a system that works from the go. I don't even think 3 days is acceptable. I think when people have paid into the system or they need things in this country, it should be available to them. Well, there is something else that's quite missing from this issue here, and it's the fact that when people do have these issues, we can get caught up in a bureaucratic mess, because you can have somebody that's ill and they're fighting issues of all sorts at the same time. And I'm going to mention very quickly a guy I came across last year. I've met quite a few people in various parts of Chester. There was a guy I came across early last year on the run up to summer. And he's actually got 4 serious health issues. His housing benefits have been stopped for around about 12 months. The rent arrears were around about £3,500, I think, from memory now. And he was being passed from pillar to post between his GP, the benefits agency, the housing organisation, the world and his wife. To the point he didn't know what to do. I was actually present when a social worker was there, and I nearly saw a social worker break down. You get the impression of quite tough couples actually, but this woman was quite affected by this. And on this point, actually, I just want to say something as a personal thank you to the staff at Stephen Mosley's office, because they stopped that guy. was present when not only the social worker was there, but when the guy admitted, I didn't know this, he was actually contemplating at some point suicide. We need a system in place. We need a system in place that not only works from go, but there's something there that is funded at local level to provide one point of contact that can stop the system from falling apart. I saw a letter from this man's GP, and it stated in black and white.
Can we have a short answer, please?
It was stated in black and white that this man, on being made homeless, it is likely to kill him. And the answer is this: we cannot afford to have any system, whether it be 21 days or 3, that fails to provide need and assistance in this country. Full stop.
Thanks, Steve. Stephen, finally, could you comment on this 21-day pass?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you to Steve for mentioning my staff. Over the years, we've had a good number of people come to me with benefits problems, and we've been able to deal with them, help them, and point them in the right direction. In many cases, get the money that they're owed. But one thing I will say is that there has been a big change in the past 5 years. Benefits problems were probably the biggest source of problem that I received as a Member of Parliament when I was first elected in 2010. And the system's working an awfully lot better now than it was 5 years ago. I get a lot less people coming, a lot less issues. And it's a fact. And the issue, we're talking about the 21 days of universal credit here. Actually, universal credit is one benefit which replaces a whole raft of benefits, whether it's job seekers allowance, whether it's housing benefits, whether it's council tax benefits. In the past, people were having to claim for each of those separately, and you were lucky if any of those were dealt within 21 days. The system was in a real mess. It was at breaking point. It really was, and people were suffering because of it. Now, we wanted to make sure that we introduced a single benefit system, universal credit, that people would claim whether they're in work or out of work. So you didn't have this situation where someone suddenly gets a job, suddenly gets some income, and loses all of their benefits at any one stage. So the point of universal credit is to make sure that people are always better off in work than they are at home fully on benefits. But we also learned from previous welfare reforms. For instance, we learned from when child tax credits were changed in about 2006, where it was all done in one day and it all went wrong. Millions of people across the country failed to get the money they were owed, and millions of people actually paid more money than they were owed, which is actually an even bigger problem. Because of course what happens then, they get paid this money into their account, they spend it, and then they've got the government chasing them to get that money back. What we've tried to do with universal credit is to introduce it in a slow, managed way, so there is no big bang, but so that it's introduced in a way that there are no mistakes. And the pilot started about 2/3 of the way through last year, and I was with the Secretary of State, Tim Douglas-Smith, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he was able to stand up and say, over the course of that time, there's not been one mistake that we've been able to identify in terms of whether someone is being paid incorrectly when they shouldn't have been paid, or not being paid when they should have been paid. The new system is working an awful lot better than the previous systems it introduced. But it's been done in a managed way so that you don't have the big bang approach, and that you don't have a situation where you introduce a new computer system for millions of people in one go and it doesn't work.
Thank you very much, Steve. No, I'm sorry, you can't have things shouted from the floor, sorry. No, I'm so sorry. No, you won't, because if people are going to ask, they're going to have to be called by the chair. Can't work any other way. We're going to move on to my next topic now, and that's defence. I'm sorry, I'm going to move on because we need to go in an hour report. Sorry. No, I'm moving on to the next topic now, which is defence. A short question. Let's see if we can get into the spirit of Benny Boothroyd. Short, pointed answers. Would you renew Trident or not? Steve, for you here. Where do you stand on Trident?
I'm in favour of renewing renewing Trident. The world is a very volatile place. I think we should meet our 2% NATO commitments. Our forces in this country have been put to the bone. Our Army, Air Force and Navy are just absolutely reduced beyond belief. We need to maintain security of this country. We cannot afford, in this day and age, the way the world is, not to have a secure defence.
Okay. Short answer, you're a yes. Thank you. Stephen, are you a yes or a no to renewing Trident?
I'm very much a yes. We haven't had a major European war since 1945, and I think that is solely down to the fact that we have got that deterrent, which we hope we never have to use, but we've got it to stop people attacking us, threatening us, and killing thousands, if not millions, of our citizens.
Thank you very much indeed. Short and sharp now. Bob, Liberal Democrat, are you yes or no to renewing Trident?
I'm against renewing Trident. I'll be quite straightforward about it. The reason is that since the world has changed from the Second World War, we now are worried and concerned about people living in the shadows who are attacking our country. And what we need to be investing in actually is technology so that we can counter these individuals and these terrorist groups which are out to undermine our society. We cannot lob Trident at a basement in London. It ain't going to work. What we have to be is smarter, cleverer, use our money in our defence budget to make sure that we have the appropriate intelligence to counter tomorrow's threats, not yesterday's threats.
Yes, no. Now, Chris, where do you stand on the Labour Party? Renewing Trident.
The policy of the Labour Party is to commit to renewing Trident. Bob is correct, there are a myriad different threats and there would have to be a myriad different responses, whether we're talking about cyber attacks, whether we're talking about the terrorist threat that's coming out from Islamic State. But we do have Russian planes once again skirting around British airspace, and President Putin is flexing his muscles again, and it is in the context of an uncertain world and uncertain threats 20 years hence that it is the view of the Labour Party in our manifesto that we will renew Trident.
Thank you, Chris. Right, now, over to you. Trident, defence issues, who'd like to start from the floor on this one? Yes, please, the lady towards the back. Pardon. Gentleman, name is? Jonathan, thank you, Jonathan. And your question, Jonathan?
To the people that want to renew Trident, how have you costed this within your manifesto? Because there's only one party that I know that's been independently verified. So how are you going to justify the costs of Trident?
Thanks, Jonathan. If you are a yes, in a sense I could, but then coming on Bob to no, how are you going to afford it? Chris, how are we going to afford Trident?
In terms of, let me just talk about independent verification. We asked our manifesto, for all manifestos, to be independently costed by the Office of Budget Responsibility, and unfortunately the Conservative Chancellor George Osborne denied that request. The answer is, the answer to your question, and I'll always be honest, I'm never going to shirk an answer. The answer to your question is, I don't know the technical details of that. I believe that the costing is based over not just the manufacture of the submarines and the weapon systems, but over the 20 to 30 year life period of the system, and it's based on the knowledge we have of operating costs at the moment, the projected costs of the construction of the ships and the systems, and the likely maintenance and ongoing costs of those as well. And we are well aware of how much those costs cost. There we have it.
Stephen, how are you going to afford Trident?
Well, Trident has been in the government's budget since the middle of the last Labour government, wasn't when they made the decision to renew Trident. So it's all fully budgeted for within the budget, within the government's accounts over the next 20, 30 years. It's all contained within there. When you're looking at independent verification of things like parties' manifestos, what you're looking at is the changes to the status quo. Now, the Trident is in there as part of the status quo at the moment, so it's fully budgeted for going forwards. When you're looking at verification of parties' manifestos, you're looking at whether they're planning to spend more or spend less than what is being proposed currently. We're proposing to maintain the status quo on Trident. It's been costed within government budget since 2005-2006, and it's fully costed there.
Thanks very much indeed. And Steve, for you here, how are you going to afford Trident?
Basically, we're going to start looking at the foreign aid issue. We're going to look at government spending. We're going to cut council and government waste across the board. We're going to reduce fat check pay in councils across the board. And effectively, we're going to commit to a 2% NATO commitment of government spending in relation to Trident and agricultural defence of this country. At the end of the day, you don't just walk in. You've got to commit to spending money correctly and responsibly in this country. We're seeing councils pay council leaders, chief executives, £250,000 a year. We're going to go through the fine. We're going to go through the council spending with a fine-tooth comb at every level in this country and spend it responsibly, reduce it where appropriate, and make sure that we fund defence, the NHS, public services, and welfare, and prioritise the important things in this country.
Thank you, Steve. Now, that takes us on nicely to our next question. So I'm going to move on, if you don't mind. We've got so much to cover, and that is overseas aid. Would the panellists maintain the level of overseas aid, increase it, or reduce it? Bob, where do you go on overseas aid? Keep it as it is, spend more, spend less.
Well, my party, through a private member's bill, actually secured in law that this country would commit 0.7% of GDP to overseas aid. And that's happened this year. So I am fully supportive of that. It's the best that we can do at the present time. But the important thing, I think, to recognise is why we're doing that, why we're committing this country to that level of expenditure. And I think one only has to look at things like the Ebola crisis that other parts of the world are facing at the present time, and to see the real difference that our investment, our aid to those countries that are suffering so badly are making in terms of being able to counter those kind of diseases that corrode those societies and those nations. That's one of the reasons. So we will learn more about the Ebola disease, and we will ensure that we are able to counter it better the next time. What's more, when we are over there, we are building up an infrastructure for those countries to be able to deal with not just the Ebola crisis of today, but other medical conditions. They will have an infrastructure that we will leave behind that will sustain those countries for years to come. As a country, we should be proud that we are investing in other people's lives, those who have not had the same opportunities that we've had. We have the opportunity to provide education, to provide medical services, to provide infrastructure to others who are less fortunate than ourselves. And I, as a human being, am very proud of that. I firmly believe that we should be doing that into the future, and I believe that we should actually be doing more of it. Thank you.
We'll take the panelist answers before we open it to the floor, if that's okay. So Steve, overseas aid, you're going to maintain it, increase it, or reduce it?
No, we're not going to increase it, and we're not going to maintain it. We've had conversations this evening about dire levels of poverty in this country. And we're also talking about the level of the national debt. £1.5 trillion is going up by about £90 billion a year. Does anybody really believe that this country right now is in any position to borrow money and give it away? We are not an irresponsible party, actually we're very responsible, because we would support things like inoculations, clean water, an epidemic such as Ebola and things like that. This is not a party that doesn't care. This is a party that's responsible to the determination of its people and prioritises the important things that we need to do. We're talking here tonight about all sorts of issues, about defence, about the NHS, about the decline in the education system, about lack of opportunity for young people, about health, about the general health and welfare of the nation as a whole. And yet all of a sudden, when we're in debt, we have a consensus to still commit to giving over £200 million a week in foreign aid. Effectively, what you've got is a situation whereby poor people in a rich country, like Britain, end up giving money away, which ends up in the hands of rich people in poor countries. And this has been going on for decades. It's ended up in the hands of dictators and warlords in other countries instead of going to the people that need it. So we would want to make sure, on reducing the foreign aid, that the emergency things that need to go there, and they are targeted, and we have systems in place to make sure that the people that get those things, inoculations, food, epidemics, things like that, and make sure those supplies and those things go to the people that need them. But what we cannot have is a situation whereby we're giving money to places like India with its own space program, and China with a growing economy. It's an absolute nonsense. Something sensible is going to take place in the future.
Thanks, Steve, very much indeed. So please, Stephen, where do you stand on foreign aid?
Sometimes when you're in opposition, it's very easy to see the world in a very simplistic manner. But the world is actually a lot more complicated than that. In our last manifesto, we made a commitment that we would commit to 0.7% of GDP on aid, and we've actually delivered that over the course of this government, because we are a government which has actually delivered on its promises. Now, Steve, one of your big issues is immigration. Now, the one way you can encourage and increase immigration is by having natural disasters and poverty across the world. I believe that the best thing that we can do to reduce immigration is to actually help countries across the world develop, improve their own lifestyles, eradicate diseases, so that people are happy to live there, enjoy their own lives there, rather than wanting to flee somewhere else like here. And that is what we managed to do to a large extent over the past 5 years. We've got some fantastic success stories. My neighbouring member of Parliament, Stephen O'Brien, in about 2007, 2008, wrote a report on combating malaria. Now, since we've been in government, that report has been taken up by the UN, and it's led to a 40% reduction in malaria globally since 2010. Millions of lives have been saved. And it's been this government that has been pushing it through. This government, the British government, the Conservative and Lib Dem coalition government that has pushed this through at the UN and saved millions of lives. And I'm incredibly proud of that. But there are many misconceptions about aid. We heard it from Steve talking about China and India. Now, if he'd been at Hustings in 2010, what he has said would have been true. We had a big debate, I remember, at Hustings in 2010, where I criticised aid being given to Russia and China and India, and I said we would stop it, and we have stopped it, because it is wrong as giving money to countries that are sending rockets off to Mars or the moon or wherever it is that they're doing it. Many countries are wealthy and can support themselves, and we should be focusing our aid where it's most needed. There's another issue as well that you mentioned, that's corruption. Now, there were problems with corruption in the past. However, I can guarantee you, if there's any case, any suggestion of corruption with British aid money, the money is stopped immediately, and that whole country no longer receives aid until they put themselves right. It's happened in countries like Malawi over the past 5 years, where we have stopped aid until they've sorted themselves out.
Okay.
The corruption is not happening anymore. Finally, on the 0.7%, I wholly support the 0.7% aid, but I personally would not, I did not personally support setting that level
Okay.
as official legal policy and government policy, because I think each government should make a decision of how it spends its own money based upon its own desires, rather than having sort of set figures set in legislation.
Thank you very much indeed. Who else can I think for that very much indeed, Stephen? Chris, what's your view, what's your take on overseas aid? Keep it the same, increase or decrease?
I support, the Labour Party supports the 0.7%, and it goes to the type of world that we want and the role that the United Kingdom has in it. I understand that some parties want to curl up in a ball, pull up the drawbridge and not interact with the world. That's not the role that I see for the United Kingdom, and frankly I think we have a moral duty to support those countries that are not as wealthy as ours, simply because it's the right thing to do. But I want to use a couple of arguments that people who don't agree with that position might understand. So for example, if we don't give that foreign aid, I can guarantee you organisations such as Al-Qaeda or ISIS will. And we've seen that, for example, in Yemen, and we've seen that in parts of the Horn of Africa and East Africa, where radical fundamentalist Islamic forces have taken a grip in countries of extreme poverty and are now providing a threat to the United Kingdom and our allies and sort of Western liberal democracies that were, and the systems that we are trying to encourage countries to understand, because there is such profound poverty and lack of hope in these countries, and a sense that Western countries are not doing anything to help, that they look for the best option. Now this isn't the reason that I believe, but I actually think it's a good enough, because I believe we should support development because it's the right thing to do. But there are tangible reasons as well for our long-term security why we should be doing it, and we need to bear those in mind, because frankly, as we've seen, when we get ourselves into tangles and raptures, it's a lot more expensive in the long run. There's one other point I want to make, and that's I'd be quite happy to abolish the Department for International Development and our overseas aid budget. And there's a very easy way to do it. If these globalised corporations that are trading in the developing countries paid their fair share of tax in those developing countries, we wouldn't need overseas aid. And a collection of development charities, I think Christian Aid and War on Want and Oxfam, undertook a 2-year forensic examination of tax avoidance and tax dodging by globalised corporations, and arrived at the figure of $360 million a day not paid to global corporations. I have to tell you now, I don't want my taxes to be used subsidising their tax dodging in developing corporations.
Anyone else to come in on the subject of overseas aid? No? Yes, gentlemen, back in please. Thank you. Your name is?
David Thompson.
David, thank you. And your question, David?
It's interesting listening to this panel. It's a little bit like last year, the last election. Gordon Brown, I agree with Nick. Chris and Steve seem to be agreeing with each other.
Question?
The question I'd like to ask is, if we genuinely have people using food banks in this country, why are we not supporting them before we spend money on it?
Thank you, David. And the question, is it compatible to have food banks on the one hand and give overseas aid on the other? Bob, how can you have both?
We've talked about the food banks. There's clearly a problem with people in receipt of benefits, which is one of the dominant reasons why people are using food banks in this country. That can be addressed. The numbers who are using food banks at the present time in this country can be significantly reduced if only we got our act together in this country to ensure that they were delivered. I don't believe we're going to ever eliminate food banks, I have to tell you, because there will always be a very small number of people who will require support. And let us just pay tribute for a moment to the charities and the churches who've done a fantastic job actually through decades, not just in recent days or recent years, around supporting communities and people who have fallen on hard times.
Right, thank you, Bob. you have more?
His best interests. You know, we want to broaden our trading capability in the future. It's in our interest to ensure that we have countries that we can trade with in the future that have the infrastructure, the capability and the skills in order to manufacture in their own right so we can trade. It's an investment on our part. It's an investment in as a human being, and it's an investment in foreign economies, and that's very important.
Thank you very much, Rob. Stephen, how would you justify both food banks on the one hand and overseas aid on the other?
I think I've justified why I think international development is important in my previous answer. Going back to what I said about the welfare system earlier, we have actually got a very, very generous welfare system in this country. We have got a welfare cap that we've introduced at £26,000. Remember, that's not taxable income. If you're talking about pre-tax income, it's the equivalent of earning best part £35,000 a year. Now, I think that is enough for people to live on over the course of a year, and we have got a generous situation. There is no need for people, if they're receiving the benefits, to be on food banks. You have got problems with things like sanctions. I know we talked about sanctions before, but ultimately, people have to take responsibility for their own actions, and people aren't sanctioned for no reason. People are sanctioned if they do things like don't turn up to interviews that they're committed to attending. They're sanctioned if they do things like not apply for jobs. I think it's reasonable if someone's capable of work that their benefits should be dependent upon them taking the necessary steps to them getting work. And if they're not taking those steps, then sanctions are, in many cases, the only way of trying to encourage them to take more responsibilities.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Steve, for you, how do you square overseas aid on the one hand and food banks on the other?
The gentleman raised a very important point, and to me, he's right. It is a mismanagement of responsibility and priority to give money across the world, whilst tonight we're talking about all of the issues that we've got going on in this country. It is completely unacceptable and irresponsible. How can you borrow money that you haven't got to give it away whilst you're leaving people at home without? How can you do that as a nation? That is thoroughly irresponsible. And to commit through legislation to 0.7% of GDP and give this huge amount of money away, which we do not have. Let's not forget, these three parties collectively have been responsible for leaving your country £1.5 trillion in debt, and that does not, by the way, when it comes to the Labour Party on the national debt and their contribution to it, include bailing out the banks. So I'm not having this anymore from the Labour Party that they use the banks as a smokescreen. It's a nonsense. We're going to have that ended tonight. In relation to 2 points, I'm glad you're here, really, fantastic. I really am. You said, as a Labour councillor, are actually responsible for doing a tremendous job with UKIP in Chester. And you said, with the level of representation that we have in one area of Chester, you're absolutely responsible for driving me forward and allowing me to be continuously determined to the point that I ended up standing for Parliament. And I dedicate my parliamentary standing to you tonight, sir.
All right. Thanks, Steve. All right. Chris, just very briefly, because I'm conscious now, it's 9:05. I'd like to take one more question substantively if we could. We did start at 7:30. I don't want to exhaust everybody this evening. It's been a superb question and answer session. Let's just hear Chris and the Labour Party's take on this issue of whether you can have food banks on the one hand and overseas aid on the other.
David, the 2 points you raised. First of all, there are profound differences between myself and the Conservative Party in terms of values and philosophy, and in terms of practical policies. But when there are occasions that Stephen and I, perhaps by chance, find ourselves in agreement, I'm not going to disagree with him for the sake of disagreeing. And I think people want a bit of mature politics sometimes. In question of why is it okay to have, how is it compatible that we can have food banks here and overseas aid over there, and we should be looking after one or the other. Let me tell you straight, they're both caused by the same problem. And the same problem is exploitation of ordinary people, either in the UK, in work, but not paid enough, and having to go to food banks because they're, the employers that they are in are forced into a race to the bottom by big globalised corporations, perhaps, where they're having to drive down wages just to stay in business. Or they're caused by big globalised corporations in foreign countries, in developing countries, that, as I explained earlier, will take as much money out of that country as they can. And ordinary people in this country, and ordinary people in, and I say ordinary people, it could be anyone in this room, and ordinary people in a developing nation have exactly the same priorities. Live safe, feed their family, have a decent home, and live in some semblance of dignity. And we've got more in common with people right across the world in this room than I suspect many of you would understand. So it's the same problem. It is the exploitation of ordinary people so that a few people at the top in the United Kingdom or in developing countries, or more likely in the City of London and Wall Street, can take an increasingly bigger slice of the pie for themselves. And if we attack one problem, we attack the other, because the solution is the same: fairness.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take just one more question, one final question tonight in an excellent session. Thank you. My final question from these are all questions that you have submitted and been put together by Janet and Ray into bundled questions. Quite simply, should we welcome immigrants? Bob.
One word answer, Steve.
Bob, sorry, just one minute. Bob is going to take this question first. Should we welcome immigrants?
The national debate. Immigration is a good thing. Illegal immigrants is a bad thing. I think it's well-worn debate that organisations such as the National Health Service, which so many cherish and we all cherish in this country and nurture, would have severe skill problems were it not for immigration. Personally, I am concerned that we are actually hoovering up skills from foreign nations and leaving those foreign nations depleted of a skills base. So I very much welcome that we will be investing more in those skills that we need in the National Health Service, and I'm not just talking about doctors and nurses, but technicians and so on. So immigration is important. I think it's a scandal that we have, say, Chinese students coming over to this country studying engineering, and they can't stay on afterwards and invest their learning in this country when this country is so short of engineering skills. So there is something wrong about our current status and our current situation with regard to immigration. Illegal immigrants is a problem. Illegal immigrants need to be eliminated as far as we can from our shores. Up till now, then we have not counted people into the country and counted them out. My party will certainly be doing that in the future so that we know who is in here and we can then count them in and we can count them out. That's not happening. We're never going to stop somebody swimming ashore from 1 mile out onto some sandbank on the east coast of the country. We can't eliminate that kind of illegal immigration, but what we can control by having decent systems in place, by investing in the technology in our borders to make sure that people are not creeping in on the backs of lorries and through the Channel Tunnel and so on. It is possible to deliver a significant reduction in illegal immigration. Immigration, however, is healthy for the country. 31 million people are in jobs today, thanks to the coalition government over the last few years. More people in work than ever been the case, and we are predicting there will be more people in work tomorrow. So we will need those new skills that people from foreign nations can bring to this country to help
to ensure that our economy continues to grow. At the moment, our country is the envy of many across the world for what has been achieved in the last few years. Let's keep it going. Let's make sure we have the right mix of skills. Let's buy in those people who can build our economy for the future.
Steve, you hit should we welcome immigrants?
Thank you. Yes. Yes, we should. Because the myth is, and the perpetuated lie, UKIP is anti-immigration. What was stated is what the British people actually want and demand. 77% of the British population want a reduction in immigration and a controlled immigration policy. What they want to see is a responsible immigration policy. And UKIP's policy on an Australian points-based system, which is fair and open and more ethical to the whole of the world, and not just to EU citizens, makes sense, and it's much more fair, it's much more ethical, and it's fair and open to all. But what we have to have is a system whereby we bring in skills to fill shortages when necessary and when needed. What we cannot have is an uncontrolled immigration policy that allows, through the Lisbon Treaty signed on the 13th of December 2007 by the Labour Party, which was highly irresponsible in allowing nearly 500 million people the legal right to come live, work and settle in this country, whereby we have no control over who comes in from other countries. That was one of the most irresponsible things ever done to this country. You all see tonight, through all of the issues that we've been talking about, public services under strain, a lack of opportunities for young people, a national housing crisis where people can't access social housing, they can't leave home, people staying at home longer. In some houses now you've got 3 generations. And I say to those people who are members of the 3 political parties here, and who are standing for those 3 political parties, whether it be local or for parliamentary, I say to you this: the next time that any of you sit down with your children or your grandchildren, look them in the eye and see what you're doing to this country. See how you're restricting the opportunities available to them, because it is thoroughly irresponsible about what your party, namely the Labour Party, has done to this country. It is mere responsibility to take control of our borders. Because right now, when they say the Labour Party, and today I've had an interesting story, because today I came across a gentleman who was canvassing, who admitted to me that on the Labour Party leaflet, when I challenged the chap, and I'd been sitting there, a very nice, pleasant conversation, and I said, you want controls on immigration? It says on your leaflets, the Labour Party. And I said, how can you do this? The gentleman admitted to me that that is somewhat misleading. And that took place just after 3 o'clock today. I have a member of the Labour Party canvassing in Blakely today who admitted to me that their comment on their leaflets on controls on immigration is misleading, because they open the borders to 500 million people. That is misleading.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Should we welcome immigrants? Stephen, what's the Conservative Party's answer to that question?
Yes, we should, and I think we should look at why people want to come to the United Kingdom. And that's because we've got one of the most successful economies in the world. We've created over 2 million jobs in the past 5 years. We've created more jobs last year in the northwest of England than in the whole of France. We've created more jobs in the United Kingdom last year than in the whole of the rest of the EU. We have got our economy right. We're generating the wealth, we're generating the prosperity, and people across Europe want to come here and take part in generating and continuing to generate that wealth. And that is one issue which we haven't discussed tonight. We've been talking about how we spend the money, but actually the most crucial issue is how we generate the money, how we generate the wealth. And the way you do that is by reducing taxes, by reducing bureaucracy, allowing people to keep more of their own money, allowing companies to keep more of their own money, and then investing it in new factories, in new jobs, in new opportunities, which generates more and more wealth. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, since the collapse of socialism across the world, poverty in the world has halved. The number of people on this planet living in poverty has halved. Capitalism works. It's the biggest generator of wealth that we've ever seen. And I'm incredibly proud to stand up here, defend it, and say the most important issue is raising more money, because only if we do that do we have the money to spend on the NHS, on welfare, on international development, and on all the public services that we all enjoy, all desire, and all want.
Thank you very much indeed. And our last bite of this one, should we welcome immigrants? Chris.
I hear Stephen's, Conservative Stephen, talking about the thousands of new jobs that we've got in the northwest, and he's right. And funnily enough, I was talking to a woman in Lake at the weekend who's got 3 of them. But I digress. It's about should we welcome immigrants. And as part of a managed programme of immigration, yes, we absolutely should. And this country has been built on immigration in the past, and if somebody wants to come here, contribute to the system, pay their taxes, work hard, follow our laws and play by the rules, we should absolutely welcome them as somebody who will help generate the wealth that Conservative Stephen is talking about. There is a problem with immigration at the moment, in that it is being used to bring labour over here, that is used then to drive down wages, not by the immigrants, they're the ones being exploited. It drives down wages and wage levels for the rest of us, so the companies that are bringing them over, and particularly the agencies, the job agencies that are doing it, can take for themselves an ever bigger slice of the pie. And there are plenty of good employers out there, decent people who want to look after their employees, but who have to follow that race to the bottom and drive down the wages, because there are a few very bad employers using these employment agencies that use immigrant labour to drive down wages, and they have to follow that race to the bottom. And one of the policies that Labour is proposing is that we will ban employment agencies from simply advertising jobs abroad. If jobs are in Britain, they have to be advertised in Britain. But I'm sick of immigrant labour, of immigrants being used, A, exploited themselves, and B, being used by a very few greedy people at the top to drive down wage levels for the rest. So we need to tackle those people who are responsible for the unfairness and the exploitation, and that will benefit us all.
Nobody wants to have a very quick supplementary. We really are running out of time now. Bob, quick supplementary if we can. Keep it brief.
I'll make 2 very quick points. The world's changing. You know, tomorrow's generation, we're talking about international careers. People need to explore different cultures if they're to build for their careers in the future. So our graduates of today, they'll be moving around the world. They'll be the immigrants of another country. And we need to make sure, as a free trading nation, that we give our young people the skills so that they can build for their futures. So immigration is important, but remember, it isn't just one way. The other point I was going to make is, it isn't that long ago, and I'm old enough and ugly enough to remember, when Britain was the sick man of Europe. And what happened then? Well, the Brits went abroad. They went to the construction sites in Germany and France and Spain, and they earned a living, and they took the wage and they sent it home in order to put bread on the table of the families. So, you know, what goes round comes round in some measure. And part of being within a European community actually is about looking after one another. So let's not have a prejudiced debate. Let's have an open debate on this subject. Let's look at it from all angles, because there are very positive things for UK residents working abroad. 1.4 million UK residents live abroad. It's important.
Right. I'm sorry we are really out of time now, but I just want to finish if we can with what looks to have come in as a rather more light-hearted question just to finish this excellent session we've had tonight, which is that we're now sitting here in a high school hall. If the candidates had their times over again, what would they do differently? Chris, if you could go back to high school, what would you do differently?
It's a tough one. I'm sorry, it's not a particularly funny answer, this. I always regret that I wasn't very good at sciences, because I believe that sciences in this country are undervalued, but offer so much, and I would work harder in physics and chemistry.
Thank you. All right. Steve, what would you do differently? If you were back at high school again, what would you do differently?
I would probably have chosen a different career at an early stage. I would probably be tempted to go into politics and try and correct the 35 years to 40 years of the despicable betrayal and lies that we've seen with the European Union. I would have done this. I've followed the European Union for 30 odd years since I was a kid, and I'm watching my country, our country, go down the drain. I have seen the lies and the deceit. I tell you what, finish on a funny point, I tell you what, if anybody needs a sense of humour in this country, just check out these three parties.
Stephen, you're back at school again, what would you do differently?
I'm going to give a rather boring answer, I'm afraid. I think I'd probably make a different decision about going to university. I went to university, I did chemistry at university, but actually I think I'd probably been better off not going to university, probably leaving school at 16 or 17, getting an apprenticeship, and actually working my way up. I've always found I enjoy working more than I do studying or learning, and I think actually my life might have taken a more interesting, exciting path, and I might not have, I might be doing something different to what I'm doing now, but I think if I was 17 again, I'd probably choose to do an apprenticeship, not go to university.
Thank you very much. And Bob, what would you do differently if you were back at high school again?
Well, all those years ago, back in the mid-70s, what would I do differently? Well, I had the opportunity of a trial with Burnley Football Club, which sadly I turned down under some parental pressure, and to this day, it is to my eternal regret that I did not take that opportunity, because who knows, I could have been Roy Hodgson.
That's a lovely note on which to finish. Can I thank, first of all, my colleagues in Churches Together in Chester, Brian, Janet and Ray, who helped to organise all of you coming in such extraordinary numbers tonight, and the quality of your questions, the good nature, your interventions from the floor. This has been a superb Hustings. I would like to thank the Catholic High School very much for offering their facilities to us, but especially tonight, seriously, sincerely, I want to thank our four candidates for standing, for coming along.